the Candypants Lifestyle Podcast. Interviewing the world's industry leaders on their journey.
Where do we go from here?
Hello, and welcome along to the Candypants Lifestyle Podcast. I'm Nick, and this week we roll out the big guns. There really aren't many names that hold the heavyweight status that this week's guests does. But then again, there aren't many people who achieved what this week's guest has. Innovator, creator and industry leader, he's one of the biggest DJs of his generation. He's been there, done it, and then done it all again. In a career that has reached every corner of the globe, being littered with awards, accolades and praise from his peers. He holds iconic status in Ibiza and beyond, and his music has been enjoyed by millions. After over 30 years, this judge will still not budge. You're about to hear one of the biggest DJ names on the planet talking to me on our little podcast. So I'll admit in advance, I was even more nervous doing this one than I normally am doing these, and well, that really is saying something. So you won't be surprised to hear me say, I kind of hope no one's listening. But if you are, I hope you very much enjoy the journey of the legend that is Mr Judge Jules. Mr Judge Jules, an absolute legend of nightlife on the podcast. Jules, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
I mean, this podcast is just all about, trying to speak to people from across the lifestyle industry, like leading figures. And the more I've thought about it, we should have just got you on from the start and it would stopped. I would have saved so much time. You'd been DJ, producer, promoter, radio presenter, a music lawyer. It's like you name it, you have done it, haven't you?
Yeah, I think within the music sphere, certainly I've done the majority of kind of different job descriptions. Does that make me directionless or does that make me lucky? I don't know which. Certainly in 2020, I'm now my main kind of roles are during the week running my legal practice. I represent hundreds of different, artists in particular, but managers, entities, labels. So that's kind of my midweek job. And then at weekends, of course, DJing, which under normal circumstances, I remain really, really busy. In 2019, I did 100 gigs. This year, I probably would have exceeded that, except for certain circumstances that have screwed the gigs up big time. But I've been doing live streaming from my lounge. Did the 7th week just now, this weekend, and thus far I've got over 2 million views. So it's all been going very well in that respect as well.
I suppose the big question for you is that you've been DJing for so long. Like, I think it's like nearly over 30 years. You must have seen so many DJs come and go, but you've lasted. Why do you think that is?
Oh, God. 30 years sounds a bit frightening, doesn't it? It sounds like the sort of person that if I was 18, would I want to have gone to see somebody who'd been doing it for such a long time? I think the bottom line is, I probably don't look like I've been doing it for 30 years, although I certainly don't look like I've been doing it for 5 years. I think the biggest thing, all you have as a DJ, a kind of club and festival, an event DJ, is your ears and your ability to choose the right records and put them together correctly, and just how into it you are, how much energy you exude behind the decks, because you can't fool anybody. And I think one of the main reasons why I've seen a number of DJs come and go, whilst I have still continued strong, is because people they get burnt out, they lose the love. But I never really have. I really do love it. And you can't fake it. It's not something you can act. Either you're kind of in it or you're outside of it. And I just still consider myself to be very in it now. Although if you told me that I'd still be doing it now, a decade, 2 decades ago, I would have laughed clean in your face.
It's funny, you say a decade ago. And I think what's strange for me about doing this is that I'm 28 now. And like when we were 17, me and my mates, we went to Iron Apple, and you were the first DJ we ever went to see in like a proper nightclub. And we thought we were the coolest people ever. And like, I can guarantee you we definitely weren't. But I remember and just thinking that was the first time I had a grasp of what the difference between, Joe Bloggs, the DJ who works in, a local nightclub, versus an international DJ. We were like, wow, this was something special. So, but you're still doing it 10 years on, and we're probably doing it 10 years before. What do you think, you've seen all these DJs coming through.
What would you maybe say to some of them now? If you were like, look, I've done it before. This is the advice I'd give you.
Well, I think one thing you can't teach is love and hunger. And of course, love and hunger for being in the music industry does wane for many people. I'm really lucky that it hasn't for me. I just, in many ways, about 10 years ago, I went to night school and retrained to become a lawyer and set up my music legal practice. Which I sort of did because I was touring so madly. I was doing something like 300 flights a year, was doing, going long haul every other week, was literally never at home, and which sounds amazing, but actually if you're on your own or occasionally with a tour manager, it's quite sort of, I wouldn't say lonely because I'm quite comfortable in my own skin, but it's definitely not the kind of rock and roll fantasy that you might imagine it is. I mean, the gigs are great, and but there's a lot of spade work, masses of spade work, masses of travelling, and I think for me, going back to night school, becoming a lawyer, setting up a music practice, representing other people, and looking at other people's careers has really invigorated my own career, because it's reminded me how lucky I am, and reminded me what it is I love about what I do. And a lot of being a music lawyer, it's not, of course, what I do is I negotiate deals, I sort out disputes with people, I negotiate contracts, I draft contracts, but at the same time having a deep-seated understanding of what it is to be an artist and what it is to be standing up there, which fundamentally all artists have got a little bit of insecurity, because anybody in the world of arts tends to have some sort of background, I don't want to say issue in their lives, but some reason why they're out there doing it. They're not, because it's not a normal job to do. But for me, suddenly getting involved in the careers of others when I'd spent the prior 20 years solely focusing on my own career has really helped me sort of get my mojo back and know precisely what it is that I love about it so much, and count my lucky stars for still being here, because really there are very few people in my position globally who've been doing it as long, who remain as busy.
Do you think that's the main thing looking at other people's careers has taught you about your own?
Yeah, I think you've got to be, as I say, being a lawyer, because when you're a lawyer, a music lawyer, you're learning things, secrets, intimate details about people's careers that nobody gets apart from those that are closest to them. Really, only their lawyers and their managers. And it just gave me a new spark. It actually caused me to change my own manager that I'd had for many years, try somebody new. It turned out to be hugely successful, and just take some of the lessons of other people around you. Because you, as an artist, you live in this kind of insular, tunnel-visioned world where it's very easy to lose track with what other people are doing around you, but also lose track with who you are on a deeper level, on a psychological level, and actually sort of remind yourself to go out there, enjoy yourself, and maybe on the one hand take yourself seriously, but arguably more importantly, not take yourself too seriously. Realise that there's bigger problems in the world, and you're supplying kind of light relief for people.
I think the more interviews that I've read of you, heard of you, and then obviously listened to this as well, you seem to break almost every stereotype people might have of an average, potentially Ibiza DJ. What do you think is the big misconception that people often have about you, that maybe when they meet you, they suddenly go, oh?
I don't know. I wouldn't be so vain as to try and sort of dig into what conceptions people have about me. I think ultimately you can only look at yourself in the mirror, be true to yourself, not be an arse, and try and treat people around you with respect. So I wouldn't necessarily say I know what other people's perceptions are. I mean, in terms of an Ibiza DJ, which I definitely count as, I mean, I've done well over 500 gigs in Ibiza in my career. I guess one of my greatest, I think you're almost born with this. You're either one of those people who's the last one to leave the party, or you're the first one to leave the party. I wouldn't say I'm the first, but definitely if there's anything, staying up all night and staying up for days has never really been my thing, which isn't to say I'm boring and don't stay up till 6 a.m, no problem at all. But I think for me, that's kept me quite clear-headed and quite, I've never got lost in the whole madness of the hedonism, and I've had many friends over the years who've developed sort of addiction problems because of the lifestyle that is wrapped around DJ culture. And that's I love a drink. I'm not boring, don't get me wrong, but I just don't have that addictive gene, and I think probably that's a contributing factor to being around for such a long time. I don't mean still being alive and kicking with a pulse. I mean being around, having a career for such a long time.
I don't mean to ask you this so you compare yourself to a lot of other DJs. Don't get me wrong, I don't speak to lots of international DJs. But you strike me as a lot more thoughtful than perhaps who I would imagine a lot of other DJs maybe like. I don't know them, so it might not fair for me to say that. But do you think that's true?
I would say I'm more thoughtful than some. I know plenty of other very intelligent DJs, but I think that if you've been around a while, when the kind of when the adrenaline and the sort of the superficial stuff gets peeled back, or the novelty of that superficial stuff of, you know, being around girls, or being the centre of attention, which, dare I say, when you're standing on a stage you are, or having a fan base, all that stuff that can probably have a slightly detrimental impact on your personality and your ego. But eventually when that all sort of starts to settle down, and you start to you've been in the industry a while, I think the intelligent amongst us start to question the deeper aspect of what it is you're doing, who you are, what you represent, and what music represents, because music's the most unique art form in terms of its emotional tugs. It's the only art form that we can sort of attach to memories, it just has a unique, of course, visual arts have an emotional tug, but nothing like music. And I think, you know, getting a little bit more perspective on your place in the world. I'm not trying to sound all hippie at all. I'm just trying to say I'm much more thoughtful than I am hippie, if you like, about it. But the other thing is, as you grow up a bit more, and as your friends, the great thing about the music industry is that it really is quite. It's got people from across the social spectrum. It's not full of, yes, maybe some of the bands appear to be full of middle-class kids. You know, don't get me wrong, I'm a middle-class kid, but it's quite, it really does pull from quite a broad social sort of pool, if you like. And so it makes you, again, that makes me quite thankful to be part of something that's not very much. You're born in one social lane, you live in one social lane, and you die in one social lane. Music's a much broader, the music industry is a much broader church than that, and I really enjoy that about it.
Can I just ask, you've said there about, obviously, maybe that you've kind of, as you've grown up with it, you've seen it and you look at it maybe in a different light, certain elements of it, but have you ever been drawn into those kind of things where you've thought, oh, maybe I'm getting too attached to these elements, this egotistical things, or the whole glitz and glamour of it, and you thought, I'm getting too drawn into this now?
I think there was, you know, when I was, we're going back a really long time. There was probably a time where I thought I was taking too many drugs, but yeah. You know, we're going back a long time. I mean, this is not
and you weren't
not
the only
recently.
One,
no, you know, we're going back into my 20s, into my early 20s, in fact. But that was because it was never really me. It was quite an easy one to get out of, because I don't have that addictive gene. Some of my friends retrospectively told me that they thought I was capable of being a bit of an arse and a bit full of myself. But that's why we have friends. That's why you don't want to surround yourself just by sycophantic yes people. You want to surround yourself by your old mates who are prepared to tell you when you're being a bit of a tit, you know. But again, that's I'd like to think that none of my true friends would say that of me in recent decades, even. But it's important to take stock. It's important to surround yourself by people by your true friends, the people you've grown up with.
So if we go back to basics, why Judge Jules?
So I got into DJing when I was very young. In fact, I'm from North London. I've always lived roughly sort of apple near the tree. I've probably only ever lived within about a 2-mile radius of where I was born and raised in North London, which is a very nice part of North London, so I wouldn't be a fool for making that decision. And got into DJing when I was still at school, when I was 16, just as I got into the sixth form, found a venue down the road that was prepared to allow flagrant infringement of underage rules, really. I mean, the age, me and a friend of mine, who actually went on to be a very, very successful music producer, put on events for the kids from our local area who were aged between probably about 14 and 17. And that kind of got me into the buzz of playing music to a crowd, and got me into promoting as well. And fast forward probably a couple of years, having done a number of those events, I got much more into the illegal rave scene in the late 80s, just as I'd started at university. I went to university in London, to LSE, so I had the advantage of being from London and not going out of London, therefore still had my pool of friends. And of course, when you're that age, you've probably got the largest social circle you have in your entire life. Little do you know that if you'd known that by the time you hit 30, your social circle would have got a lot smaller. You probably would have cultivated it a bit more whilst you were 18. But put on lots of illegal raves, and I was a law student. I was studying law, and this was at the beginning of sort of the end of the so-called rare groove, beginning of the acid house era, which were both very significant in the genesis of UK and indeed global club culture. And the events got bigger and bigger, but it was always me that got thrust out in front of the police. The police would always turn up. These were illegal raves in dodgy venues that we weren't supposed to be in, wet factories, warehouses, disused industrial buildings that existed in London at the time. Now every last square centimetre of London has been redeveloped, but they existed in their droves really at the time. And because I was the law student, it was always me that got thrown out to say to the police when they turned up, which they inevitably did, officer, this is a party for me and my law student chums, which of course, and if you've seen the crowd, it was just so blatantly not the case. And that's where the judge thing came, and Norman Jay, who was my cohort, who's another very long-standing DJ, gave me the nickname the Judge. And like all nicknames, they should be given to you by other people and not created by yourself. I think that's a fair rule where nicknames are concerned, and that's where the Judge thing started. So it sounded like a nice sort of easy to remember name, and dare I say it, I think some of the world's most famous DJs have got really easy to remember names you could almost you could remember even if you're coming stumbling out of a club and vomit their name, you could still remember Cox. Anyway, I digress, but yeah, that's where the Judge came from.
Listen, if I was in a tight situation with the police and I was in a crowd of people and you were one of them, listening to you talk, you would be 100% the person that I would be sending to talk to them.
Yeah, it's pretty stupid at the time. I ended up I didn't get actually charged, but I ended up doing a night in the cell when eventually after this sort of bravado. The thing was that I don't know about that. I mean, whether it applies now, who knows? But the police. Late at night on a Saturday night in London were probably quite short-staffed, and they didn't really want to have to close these events down because it would cause them more problems than it would solve. What they wanted to know is that we were a sort of bunch of nice, respectable kids running these events, which I sort of was, but certainly the people I was running them with were far from. But anyway, that's the story. Exactly, yeah.
So you're going to have to indulge me a little bit here because these were a little bit before my time. Paint the picture for me. What were these illegal raves like?
Well, they were... the thing about... I mean, there's a lot of kind of historical picture painting one needs to do, I guess. First and foremost, it's important to understand that dance music was in its infancy. You could only hear it in these sort of environments. There were no clubs playing it. There was no radio playing it. All there was, so if you wanted to kind of, it was the ultimate in DIY culture, in fact. I mean, if you look at modern artists, one of my bits of spiel in my legal practice when I'm talking to young up-and-coming artists who've come through to my office for a bit of advice is talking about the importance of DIY culture and talking DIY brand creation, where you go out there, where you can't rely on anybody else to create your brand, you've got to do it yourself. And that was kind of our spirit. And when you're that young, I was 18, so when you're that young, you don't really have any fear, and the actual setup costs for these events weren't enormous. We had a sound system that we did it in tandem with. I don't really want to go into too much detail about how we found the keys to these properties, but we did. And you. But the other thing, again, the context describing them. I mean, they were all in quite dirty venues, which just about had one portaloo, and we were stringing the electricity up to kind of generators that we'd go out and rent for the weekend. So it does sound a little bit well. It sounds quite dodgy, doesn't it? The other important kind of historical fact was that all the clubs in the UK closed a lot earlier then than they do now. So out of London, things closed at 2 a.m. And even in London, which is a 24-hour city now, things generally close. In fact, almost all things close by 3 a.m. So if you were to create an environment that went on till it continued till it. You threw people out, really. We'd finish at, 7 or 8 in the morning. Whenever it seemed like the last bunch of people still in there would be there a week later if you didn't kick them out, that was the time to close. So we were catering for 2 sets of demand in the shape of licensing hours and music that weren't catered for, but also creating a kind of underground, a counterculture vibe, something that felt a bit dangerous, felt a bit illicit. And it's kind of what we did, and we weren't necessarily doing it to be illegal. We were doing it because we couldn't get in via the conventional paths. If we were able to rent a sizable nightclub in central London on a Saturday night, we would have done it. But they wouldn't have given us a hope in hell. Therefore, we went away and did it ourselves. And that kind of culture evolved into the huge raves, acid house raves of the late 80s, which was basically the sort of foundation stone of dance music culture.
This might be a naive question, but it's coming from someone who's kind of grown up like promoting nights like you did, but in the age of social media and WhatsApp and stuff. How did you get the word out back then that you were doing a
flyers?
Yeah,
flyers. We went out. We knew where the people. We knew where our. First and foremost, we understood that getting a mailing list together, which was a physical mailing list done with stamps and envelopes, was very important. We did that from the get-go. So we mailed out to an increasingly large mailing list of thousands, and we also went. There were just parts of London, certain bars, certain clubs, certain areas that where our sort of clientele would turn up to. So you just needed to go and actually physically promote to people. It's a bit like the early. I mean, probably up to 5 or 10 years ago in Ibiza. I think it's fair to say even now, if you go to resorts, you get kind of promoted to by physical PRs. Yeah. Even now, it probably happened to you and I and Apple when you went to see me back in the day, and that. But that mentality was what one had to do in London pre the internet.
So just to get back onto your journey, tell me about pirate radio.
Yeah, so I started. I mean, I've had a few little stages on my radio journey, which was pirate radio, then 2 legal stations, and now I do a sort of globally syndicated radio show. So I started on. Well, I was briefly on one other ill-fated pirate station, but I started on the then pirate station Kiss FM in London in 1987, so a really long time ago, when I was, again, very, very young, and that got legalised in 1990, but it was a very, very influential pirate station. I mean, pirate radio is something I still listen to a lot now. It has a lot of appeal to me because it's raw and it plays music from the streets, and there's not so many rules and boundaries. And what Kiss, the pirate stations at the time, it was quite a culture of the sort of the London Afro-Caribbean community. There were a lot of reggae stations. In fact, that was the predominant pirate sound. So Kiss was very different from that. Kiss was a London club culture-based pirate station, which had all the biggest club DJs from the time, many of whom have gone on to be extremely successful, many of whom went on to Radio 1, as I did. And in 1990, that was made legal. And I was on there as a legal entity for 6 or 7 years before I was then poached to go to Radio 1 in 97. I was then on Radio 1 for 15 years, until about 5-ish years ago. And now I do a sort of syndicated show that goes out all over the place, particularly via podcast and via a lot of the different social platforms.
Tell me about those Radio 1 days, because I feel that maybe that was the height of radio DJing, do you think, where things hadn't, Spotify and all this stuff hadn't come around, but having a radio show was even bigger than it is now.
It definitely was. I mean, I still pay a lot of attention to what gets played on Radio 1 now, and I know, the three principal dance DJs, well, all the dance DJs I know relatively well, now in 2000. But I don't think it's unfair to say that pre-Spotify and probably high-speed broadband, because it's easy to forget, the internet's been around for ages, for 20, 25 years, but high-speed internet, the really high-speed internet, probably doesn't go back more than about 10 years. And it was only when kind of high-speed broadband came into every home that people could start downloading DJ mixes, and that's what enabled streaming to happen. What YouTube and Spotify being the two principal platforms for music, of course Apple Music too. But so prior to that, really the way that people could access music, especially in dance culture, was much more limited. You had these specialist shows, of which mine on Radio 1, well, I had two at one time, and then one was very, dare I say it, very important. But you also had kind of other pinch points of the culture, which were record shops in particular. And Mixmag was very important. And then most of the major towns and cities in the UK had a kind of specialist dance night. And that kind of model was semi-replicated in the major territories of the world, in kind of, I don't know, Sydney, Melbourne, Los Angeles, New York, some parts of Asia, Singapore in particular. So there was a sort of microcosm of that went on elsewhere in the world. The internet, broadband has been an interesting thing. It's the minute you bring all culture to all people at all times, it's very democratizing, just about pronounce that word, in that it allows anybody to make a record and get it out there, and it doesn't make music production the domain of the privileged few. But at the same time, it's much harder to see the wood from the trees, and there is less of a distinctive voice for the curators out there. And obviously, pre that period, I was one of the key curators. I still am. I've still got plenty of fans and listeners, but I do think that era was a time when the curators of music could make a hit in their own right. One individual, me or Pete Tong or certain other people, could make a hit record in their own right. And I'm not necessarily sure whether one individual necessarily could do that anymore.
So this may be a really naive, stupid question, which I think on the surface it'll sound like, but from what you said, it may not be. Do you think the internet's benefited that journey of a DJ, or potentially just made it more challenging because there is more, as you say, kind of just more noise?
It's such a double-edged sword. The internet is certainly, I've DJed in all over the world, really, and the reason I've DJed all over the world, it's certainly if you go outside of the major clubbing territories, is down to the internet. It's down to people suddenly being able to discover you when they couldn't do before. But it has also, it's kind of made the whole thing a little bit less special. But I'm always really loath to be this old, I wouldn't say old, but older guy coming on and going on about how much better things used to be, because it is what it is now. Now music is out there for everybody. There will still be an underground, there will still be a counterculture, there will still be people doing things on an alternative basis. It's just so much more difficult to generate. They say that dance culture, particularly the late 80s and into the 90s, was the last big youth movement, and there's been a question the question has been posed whether there will be another youth movement. Now it is impossible for there to be a sort of a covert building culture that nobody really knows about until suddenly it appears in the mainstream, because the internet doesn't really allow that. Everybody's got access to everything. So I don't have any complaints. The good thing is it's much cheaper. When I was probably 21 or something, I saved for a couple of years every penny I earned from DJing, and I built my own recording studio. It cost me about $100,000 in equipment, and you could now, the same equipment I had then, you could now get for as a plug-in, as a cracked plug-in, basically for nothing. So the access to the ability to make music is completely different now from the way it was. which is good, and bad in equal measures. The corollary of that is that there are probably 10,000 dance releases a week and probably 100,000 releases in all genres a week on the major streaming platforms, because everybody can make a track. On the other hand, much more difficult to to cut through the crap and see the wood from the trees and all those sort of cliches to work out what the really great tracks are. You could argue that means that DJs become all the more important. Of course, you've got Spotify playlists that are both curated by Spotify and some individuals' playlists, and radio does remain important, but it's still significantly more difficult for there to be a kind of common voice in terms of what is the goods. What are the greatest tracks are when there's just so much volume.
If you could take me back to these glory days of Ibiza, you have played everywhere that matters. You've been there, done it, and then you went on to start Judgment Sundays. So, first of all, why did you decide to go off on your own? And then, I suppose, why do you think that became so big? I mean, it was the biggest night for all these years, in the West End, if not Ibiza, in San Antonio. But why do you think that is?
Well, I've been playing for all the major, as you say, I've been playing for all the major venues. I've been playing for Cream at Amnesia. I've been playing for Manumission at Privilege. I've been playing various things at Pasha. And I was doing well, pulling people. I was going there every week. I'd already bought a property in Ibiza, actually. But I was kind of working rotationally for different promoters, which I was very determined to do, even though a lot of promoters want to kind of grab you exclusively. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have the fun of going and doing one of 5 great venues and do it every week throughout the summer. And I was doing that from the sort of mid-90s onwards. And in the end, I was approached by some people who'd bought a pre-existing, somewhat tacky nightclub and wanted to basically rebrand it as Eden. It had previously been a venue called the Star Club, and they sold me the dream, told me about how much they were going to invest in it, and basically enabled me to semi-design the club, certainly aspects of the club. So it became something I was really invested in, and they said, we'll give you a great deal if you want to come and promote your own night. And alongside a business partner of mine, we just thought, we'll sod it, let's give it a go. And because I've been doing this thing a long time, it's difficult to highlight too many specific memories that stand out over and above all the rest. But the opening night of Judgment, which was in 2000, had the biggest queue I've ever seen at Eden outside it. And we were like, clearly, when you've gone from the security, whilst historically I'd been a promoter, for years I'd stayed within the secure blanket of having other promoters book me, pay me a fee, have me turn up. And suddenly I was going back to square one and promoting things again, which was quite nerve-wracking, because whilst I knew I could pull a crowd, I had no idea whether this was going to work. And it was just a flying success from day one, which isn't just down to me. It was down to having a great team, choosing the right DJs, and just being, and dare I say it, almost being proudly British, if you like. There was almost a sense of shame in being British and in San Antonio for a while. And for me, having a young, really go mad British crowd in San Antonio who were all very musically knowledgeable. It wasn't a sort of lager-louty crowd. We just created an atmosphere that propelled us through for 15 years or thereabouts.
Do you think that's the story you'll tell your grandkids? Or have you got another one of you to look back on your career and say, yeah, that's the one that was a bit special?
I think the problem with music and live performance and being out there is it's just like DJing, unless the closest I can get to explaining what it's like, especially DJing at a big event with a crowd that are going pretty wild, is getting one of my mates up on the decks and having them standing there right with me just to feel it. But it's really quite difficult to explain the buzz of performance in words, because it's just like, it's just all embracing. It's a drug. It's everything. So I think I may not even bother to explain it to my grandkids come day, because it's just too difficult to put into words what the experience was all about.
We have talked quite a bit about the past, so maybe if we try and get your opinions on some of the future. You've seen nightlife kind of across all of these years. Where do you think it'll go next, maybe in the next 10 years? Obviously bearing in mind kind of everything that's going on now.
Well, I mean, who knows? One would like to think that social distancing will be a temporary phase, and that there will be some way. There will be some way through this whole situation we're in the midst of at the moment. I'd be surprised if I do any DJing in front of a crowd before, I'd say, September, October at the earliest. But who knows? It's at the moment it's mere speculation, isn't it? For me, the thing about clubbing, the thing about festivals, is that as humans, we're kind of gregarious, we're kind of social, we like hanging out with people, and actually clubbing is one of the only opportunities to go and hang out with people you've never met in a relatively safe environment. Yes, if you go to one of those kind of out of town kind of ritzy type clubs where people have a scrap outside, maybe the vibe isn't quite as friendly as what I'm describing. But certainly, where I've come from is an environment where people can go, meet people. It's a genuine social opportunity to meet people you've never met before. And I know this. I mean, the amount of people have emailed me over the years saying, I met my wife on the dance floor at your gig. I mean, we're talking like scores of people I've heard that from. So for me, that kind of social aspect of it is really important. And that's why we need to have it back. And that's why social distancing will just not work in the long term. And I would like to think that we will look back on this period and think, God, that was pretty bad. But now the status quo, the norm has been restored and everything's back to normal. But it's also why I'm not mad keen on kind of VIP culture of kind of people getting bottles and booths. Fair enough, if I go to a club now, I mean, I'm not exactly your typical clubber age, so I might go in a booth, but actually I'd much rather be on the dance floor. I'd much rather be in amongst it, rather than sitting there getting my 5 minutes of fake fame with an overpriced bottle of Grey Goose. So if I've got any kind of hope for the future, it's that the VIP culture doesn't get any worse, and that people actually see a positive in being in the main bit of the club, the main bit of the venue, not sort of separate, not trying to feel some degree of sort of sense of importance.
Random one, but you hear a lot of, or you did hear, and then it died off, a lot of talk about AI and, like augmented reality, of, people going and like putting headsets on and experiencing nights like that. Do you think that could ever be something in the future that actually takes off? Or do you think we will never get away from the experience of being there in that room with that DJ?
I think now in lockdown, I've been doing my weekly live streams from my DJ booth in my lounge. I must say I never had a DJ booth in my lounge until this time. I've rapidly set up. Your
wife is over the moon.
Well, she sort of, you're married to a DJ. It comes with the deck. It comes with the deck, so to speak. I wish we had it now, actually. But then, if you asked me this question 2 months ago, prior to lockdown, I would have said no. You need to smell people's sweat. Hopefully pleasant smelling sweat. But it's all about interaction with people. It's all about being up close and personal to people. So it's a shame, actually, that there hasn't been a sufficient evolution in the sort of headset. The AI headset technology to kind of create a clubbing experience. Or maybe there has been, but I'm not aware of it. But I do hope that when we get back to a normal, non-socially distanced clubbing environment, but not just clubs, going to the theatre, going to the football, going to gigs, all of that. When all of that's back, then actually doing it with people. I mean, I love football. I've got season tickets for me and my son have got season tickets for our team. We can't go to that as well, and I like that for the same reason. I like being up close to people all going a bit nuts, and it's it can't be.
It's not the same.
And the parallel, and of course there's a talk about. They will almost certainly now play behind closed doors, and I'll certainly watch it on TV, but it's just not the same as being there, and it's similar to a virtual DJing. I'm doing it now, and I've got a couple of million viewers over the course of the weeks I've been doing it. So it's been extremely successful. But does that mean I'd rather be doing that than as opposed to being out there in the thick of things? No chance.
So obviously you've DJed all over the world, you've done this, that and the other. Then you decided to go back to school and become a lawyer. From the outside looking in, there was no real need for you to do that. You were successful in your own right. So why?
For a few reasons. One, there aren't that many DJs older than me to give me a notion of what the next step is for a so-called superstar DJ. I suppose it's probably like Carl Cox, Pete Tong, Paul Oakenfold, to name but a few. Well, to name there's not many more than that really who are older than me to look at, to think, what are they doing? And they're all continuing to DJ, but I just didn't know what was next. And with retrospect, if anything, I was busier in 2019 than I was 10 years earlier when I decided to be a lawyer. But I just needed to know what the next stage of my life is, and to have something that I could do comfortably for as long as I wanted to do, which I think with DJing, you don't want to be in a club forever. Don't get me wrong, I'm going to be doing this for a lot longer. But also the touring, doing the 300 flights a year, being away in hotels sort of 100 nights a year. I just wanted something that, I've got two kids, one of whom, the older of whom I didn't see grow up for the first 10 years of his life. So I wanted just something a little bit more grounded from a physical point of view, because just waking up in your own bed and getting a decent night's sleep. I was never going to stop DJing. I just didn't want to do it more than weekends and do it on a more sensible basis. So I just thought, what can I do? Where does my skill set lie? And ironically, I had a law degree from when I was 21, which by the time I decided to pick up the legal reins again was completely out of date. It's a bit like studying medicine in the 19th century and thinking you can suddenly be a doctor in 2020. So I had to basically do it again, get a second degree. I did it all at night school, and I did my professional qualifications, all whilst I was touring. Most of the studying was done on planes whilst touring, which was hard, but at the same time, it's good in life, not just to keep giving yourself challenges and keep giving yourself disciplines. And so came out of that. 2012, I joined one of the leading entertainment firms, and then I moved just over 2 years ago to where I will ultimately end up, which is in King's Cross. The practice is Sound Advice. It's in an area called Talyard, which is basically the biggest industrial office park of music-related businesses in the world. 200 different businesses, about 2,000 people working there, every manner of different type of business, recording studios, record companies, you name it, it's there. Apple's Beats Radio is there. So I run my practice from there. And for me, it's about, what we haven't mentioned is a lot of other things I've done over the course of my time. I ran a management company and a booking agent. I also set up a couple of labels in an A&R capacity for Universal Records. So bundling in all that experience, I knew would make me a very good, quite unique lawyer, especially one who's an active artist at the same time. And I've got a lot of time for people. And for me, it's not just a job. For me, it's actually imparting information and imparting some of the mistakes I've made along the way. I've made some right decisions, but I've certainly made some wrong ones, plenty of wrong ones as well, too. And if I can kind of stop others from doing that in an industry which has got its shady moments, that's for sure, then so that's the kind of, I don't know, I'm slightly dumbed down philosophical backdrop to it, but that's what I do, and it's worked really, really well. Got a very big client base, quite a lot of it which is dance music, but I've got a lot of pop and urban acts that I represent as well, and then various sort of clients who aren't artists, across the spectrum of the music industry, and I absolutely love it. It's a really, on paper, superficially, being a lawyer and being a DJ sound like a world apart, but they're actually very connected because of my life as an artist and the area of law in which I practice.
So now, I guess in your current role, you probably give a lot of advice to younger artists and younger people who come through to see you for advice on law. But if you were to give some advice to yourself, maybe based on you've just done your first gig in Ibiza, what advice would you give to yourself now based on what you know?
Well, I don't know if you give advice after a first gig. There's different advice according to what the circumstances are. I think there's more generic business kind of career-related advice that you would give in the first instance that came before giving legal advice? Because I often get people getting in touch with them for that more generic stage one advice, and I think that the number one bit of advice, and looking back on myself, dare I say, I did tick all those boxes, is you've got to be an all-rounder. You've got to be good at DJing, you've got to be good at marketing, you've got to be good at doing interviews, moderately intelligent at least, make good records, and good at networking, and got to be a bit lucky as well. And if you can tick... And if you can't tick all of those boxes, it's unlikely you're going to succeed as an artist, as awful as it is to say. But it doesn't mean there's not another space for you in the music business. That's important equally to say.
Jules, you have been an absolute pleasure. This has been an absolute education for me, kind of from somebody who maybe has been in this industry, but for a hell of a lot shorter time, but kind of from a more recent period. You've told me about things that I was vaguely aware of but had no real sense of, so I hope it's been the same for everyone listening as well. But thank you so much. I think we've all gathered how busy you are, so we really appreciate your time.
Great pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on board.
Phew, how does he do it? I've been swamped just doing this little podcast on top of my usual job, yet Jules seems to have been spinning plates and records left, right and centre for more time than, well, I've even been alive. But a huge thank you to him for taking the time to come on for a chat. It is finally all stations go for us at the moment, with summer 2020 kicking off, well, better late than never. We're going to start at Old Beach, Ibiza this Sunday before all of our other events in Ibiza and Marbella get going next week from July 18th. Talking of next week too, we'll also be back with another podcast, speaking with Dave Gardner-Chan, the student parties man. But until then, as always, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you all very soon.